Well, good evening. Got it. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 16th, 2023 Greater Victoria School District Operations, Policy, and Planning Committee. And I would just like to begin our meeting with an acknowledgement of the traditional territories. The Greater Victoria School District wishes to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. And I'm reminded that well, perhaps not the first European visitors to this land, but the ones who established a presence, the Hudson Bay Company, their recollections of arriving in Victoria were that it was an absolute paradise on earth. It was a veritable garden. And a number of the designations of the land, the European designations of the land, such as Clover Point, reflect that perspective. What I don't think the individuals who were making these comments recognized at the time was that this was a direct reflection of the intimate relationship that the First Nations and Lekwungen-speaking people had with this habitat. That this was an active effort to manage the land in a productive and wonderful fashion, and something we should never lose sight of. With that in mind, I'd like to move us on to approval of the agenda. Are there any amendments? I see Trustee Carmichael.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a matter of housekeeping, but Carrie Peter is not spelled with an S on the end. It's just Carrie Peter. For the Vic High Parent Advisory Council.
Oh, no S? Thank you.
No, thank you.
So this is in H1 in the motion. Okay. Anything else? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda as written? And motion passes. Thank you, Natalie. Good to see your face. And moving on to approval of the minutes. Any amendments or alterations? Karen, Trustee Kwans, right?
Yeah, I'll follow in Angela's footsteps. I've noticed it for a bit. It's not a huge deal, but my name is actually spelled with an I, K-A-R-I-N. So we'll just make that change while we're here.
We'll add that to autocorrect. Anything else? Seeing none, the recommended motion that the December 5th, 2022 Combined Education Policy and Directions Committee and Operations Policy and Planning Committee meeting as they pertain to Operations Policy Planning and Committee be approved. All those in favor? And motion passes. That's all of us in favor, unanimous. Any business arising? I see no hands. And we'll move on to presentations to the committee. And I don't have any presentations on my agenda. Were there any late ones? Not that we're aware of. Okay. Well, this is a good first page. Moving on to the superintendent's report. And we'll start off with the elementary strings review under Deputy Superintendent Colville.
Thank you, and through the chair. I invite Mr. Murray Harris to present to you today. Murray was the the consultant that we reached out to in the district to provide or to participate in, have people participate. Sorry, it's been a long day. In the elementary strings review. And Murray has spent the last several months on that review. And today he brings to you the executive summary with his findings and his recommendations. He will present to you the executive summary that he has prepared for you. And we have also included within the package the complete elementary strings review as written by Mr. Harris. So I will turn it over to Mr. Harris to present the executive summary.
Thank you. So this report is a fulfillment of the Greater Victoria School Board motion passed on May 30th, 2022, directing the superintendent to complete a review of the elementary strings program during the 2022-2023 school year and to complete a report with recommendations to be presented to the Education Policy and Directions Committee meeting in January 2023. The elementary strings program has existed in the SD61 elementary schools since the mid-1950s. Historically, it has only been offered in 16 of the district's elementary schools. It was offered in all elementary schools for the first time in September 2022. Elementary strings is an optional program for grade 5 students. Students may choose to enroll in this program, but are not required to do so. Students, they can choose to learn to play either cello, viola, or violin. Participating students must rent their instruments from a local music rental store or borrow an instrument from the district collection of instruments. Schools are, on occasion, covering the costs of rentals for families. Depending on the number of students enrolled at a particular schools, strings classes can be from 30 to 45 minutes, once or twice per week. Typically, students perform at 2 or 3 school assemblies or concerts during a school year and may participate in the mass performance organized at UVic at the end of the year. All students participating in strings are also part of the regular music instruction time that their class receives from the school music teacher. The general music instruction varies from 30 to 110 minutes per week, depending on the school. This meets the provincial requirements for music instruction in elementary schools. District-wide, 47% of grade 5 students are currently part of the elementary strings program, with participation rates at schools varying from 9% to 77% of the grade 5 students at the school. Strings classes are offered either during regular instruction time, outside of instruction time, or a combination of both. Student participation in strings is much higher when it is offered during instructional time, 57%, rather than before or after school, 42%. When strings is offered during regular instructional time, the grade 5 students not going to strings remain with their classroom teacher, which results in 2 teachers simultaneously teaching students from the same class. Teacher staffing for the elementary strings program is not part of the provincial staffing formula, and supplementary funding needs to be provided as currently staffed. Therefore, the strings teacher salaries must come from the district operating budget at a current cost of $208,817 per year. Does learning to play a musical instrument have significant cognitive and academic benefits for students? It seems to be common understanding that researchers have proven that music instruction has huge academic and cognitive benefits for students that transfer to their ability to read, do well in math, and problem solve, among many other benefits. Unfortunately, the research does not support that there are any far effect benefits of music instruction. Since 2017, there have been 4 peer-reviewed meta-analyses of the cognitive and academic benefits of music instruction. Each of these studies concluded that engagement in music has no or very little impact in the cognitive or academic skills of its participants. Where does this almost universal understanding of the research come from? Most studies looking at the possible benefits of music instruction compare music students with non-music students. In these studies, music students are slightly stronger, both academically and cognitively, than non-music students. But these studies give no evidence that music instruction is the cause of the difference. These studies are presenting correlational data and not causal. The research shows that when music instruction is optional, students who are already cognitively and academically stronger are more likely to choose to participate than those students for whom school might be more challenging. This accounts for the difference between music and non-music students in correlational studies. Furthermore, any small potential cognitive or academic benefit from music instruction is halved if the program is optional rather than mandatory. What do elementary teachers and administrators have to say? Teachers and administrators value music in the schools. They stated that students enjoy strings classes and take great pride in being able to show their musical skills in school assemblies and concerts. There were also concerns from teachers and administrators regarding the impact of learning continuity in the classroom, with 9 to 77% of their students leaving class for strings. 82% of the principals stated that they would support having strings at their school next year if it is outside of instructional time. Their support for strings drops to 23% if it must be offered in instructional time. The main reason principals gave for not wanting strings during instructional time was what they see as the disruption of learning for all students. Similar concerns were expressed by some teachers. They find that it is very challenging to use the time meaningfully with the students who are not participating in strings. They cannot proceed with teaching, and if they plan for a special project during this time, the strings students and their parents have concerns that they are missing out. Parental feedback. Community support for music in schools is very strong in Victoria. Many parents express the importance that school music programs have for their children. The comments in the Thought Exchange survey demonstrate the passion that many parents have for music in general and the elementary strings program specifically. Recommendations. Guiding questions that I used to help focus the information in this report and to determine possible recommendations are the following. Is there special value in learning to play a strings instrument, specifically in grade 5, that surpasses the value of other activities with such a demonstrably clear superiority as to warrant special funding? How can an elementary strings program be most effectively and equitably a part of the elementary school experience? And that led me to the 4 recommendations. Recommendation 1. It is the recommendation of the author of this report that the funding for the elementary strings program cease at the end of 2022-23 school year and until such time as a full review of K-12 music program can occur. Recommendation 2, it is the recommendation of the author of this report that elementary strings be included in preparation time. The recently ratified teacher's contract includes increased preparation time, which will lead to more preparation teacher postings in the fall. This provides an opportunity for schools to include elementary strings within the preparation time schedule and eliminate the need to fund staffing costs for the program from the district's operations budget. Recommendation 2A. If recommendation 2 is considered, the author of this report recommends that the district develop guidelines for school administrators to use to determine feasibility of including elementary strings in their preparation schedule for a portion of or all of the grade 5 preparation time. Recommendation 2B. If recommendation 2 is considered, it is the recommendation of the author of this report that a budget line in the district's operations budget be established for schools to access for assistance to families requesting financial support for instrument rentals and to fund potential costs for that schools may incur. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Always a pleasure to get a report from you.
Thank you.
I'm going to open this up to questions now. Do we have a show of hands? Trustee Kwan, first off the mark.
Okay, well, I actually have a number of questions. I went through a fair bit of the review, and I have some questions for you, but I know that there's probably other questions that are going to happen too. So if it's all right with you, Chair, maybe what I'll do is I'll ask the ones that are kind of relevant grouped together, and then I'll check in with you to see if there's anyone else who I don't want to take up all the time either. So make sure we give everyone else a chance too.
Well, so far I'm waiting for more hands. So
okay.
Please start
right.
and perhaps generate
Okay.
some comments.
Yeah, so I was just curious about the studies that you cite, specifically in your references, but also that you refer to in your executive summary, and why you chose those particular studies to focus on, and if you had any more information about the studies that it's refuted and the ones that, the other studies it refers to when, it's wrong and the causal, causal effects and that kind of thing. So do you have any other studies that you can point to that would kind of refute, or that these studies refute?
Well, the studies I looked for, I focused on were the meta studies. So those were studies that were looking at all of the data on music instruction, and some of them specifically on instrument instruction for school-aged children. And the 4 studies that I cited, and there were many more in my bibliography than the 4 that I also did go to for information. And while in my executive summary, I focused on the cognitive and academic aspects, but there was also one study that did look at social emotional benefits, and there is possible benefits at the social emotional level, which are not none of the benefits in the research that I could find that were non-correlational were showing strong benefits. There were mild benefits, and I found it interesting that the connection between the possible benefits and the optional or non-optional aspect of the strings program. And that was part of my rationale for proposing or recommending that the strings program be considered as a preparation time, so that any potential benefit that is there, and the research is not definitive that there is none, but it is quite clear that it isn't as strong as we have often heard it being reported as in both media and anecdotally. But those benefits are certainly, it seems from the report, stronger if it is a program for all students.
Okay. Sorry, just to follow up before I allow VC Pack to have a turn here. I just was curious about, it seems like all the studies were kind of on, on the side where they were kind of refuting the cognitive benefits of music. And I just wondered if whether you had a list of any studies that they were talking about that they kind of refuted the studies, such as, Dr. Sylvain Moreno or Schellenberg or Schlag or Harrison or Vitale, all of those. Yeah. Was there any ones that you had gone through? And I was just curious why those were left out.
So those reports and some of those names are familiar to me because they are within the meta studies. So the meta studies does look at those and does address those. And so those were familiar names to me that you mentioned there because they are in those bibliographies. And so those were ones, I didn't read those individually because I was looking at any and all meta studies that I could find, which is a much more efficient way to be looking at the data than because they do address all of those articles also.
And sorry, one more follow-up, and I'm
Yeah.
just curious as to why the focus on psychological studies over educational or sociological.
Well, the studies that were there were in different journals. Some of them were educational reviews and some of them were psychological reviews. My search for data, I'm fortunate right now that I am connected to the university, so I was able to access their database and find these. And I was surprised at how many meta studies there were in the recent years, which I was not expecting to find. And the results I saw in there were not the outcome that I expected. I thought that the cognitive and academic benefits would be shown to be stronger in the research that was out there. But the meta studies are published in different journals. Some of them are psychology and cognition journals, and others there was at least one or two that were from educational journals also. And two of the studies were by similar authors, and then two of them were by other authors.
I did notice that. Thank you so much for answering those questions. I'm going to give
Thank
others
you.
a chance here.
Okay, and by all means, get yourself back on the list if you would have other questions. So next, we're going to hear from Paula Marchese with VC PAC, followed by Trustee Duncan and Trustee Carmichael, Trustee Gagnon, and Trustee Kwon. So
Great.
please go ahead, Paula.
Thank you very much, Trustee Painter, for giving me an opportunity to ask some questions on behalf of VC PAC. First of all, we want to thank Mr. Harris for the time he has taken to work on this review. It's obvious that he has put a lot of thought into it. We do want to express the fact that we find it problematic that he has put so much emphasis on the work of two scholars doing such specialized meta-analysis research on if certain cognitive skills are transferable from music to such subjects as math. These studies are accepted without question. Curiously, Mr. Harris has not done an equivalent amount of educational research, but regardless of these and other findings, what we find most disturbing is that Mr. Harris seems to take the point of view that music must pass a litmus test to be considered a worthwhile subject to teach our children in this district. First of all, I would like to ask Mr. Harris why he is taking this position, that it is not enough for elementary strings to be offered as a subject in its own right. We don't have cognitive criteria for other subjects in our district. We don't expect that French students will get better at math and that therefore French should be a prep time subject. So I'm wondering why this special scrutiny is being directed to music.
Well, my reason to do the academic review was because the academic, it is often expressed that researchers have shown very clearly and strongly and obviously that there are cognitive and academic benefits of learning music and strings and other instruments. And we saw that in the thought exchange that many of them stated very strongly that their understanding of the research in that manner. So that is brought up as an argument often, and I wanted to find what the research actually said about that. And I was not trying to prove or disprove those assumptions. I wanted to bring forth for the trustees and this committee that what the research actually does say. And that was my motivation to put it in there. I don't think personally, and I do put in there, I do write in here about that there are intrinsic values in music, and I think every subject has its intrinsic value. And I think it's a falsehood to say that it is to rely on it and to value it for other things that it does, and particularly when they're not accurate in the research. So when we're misrepresenting the research and arguing to keep a program because we think it does things that it doesn't do, then that's not a helpful basis to make a decision. My recommendations of having that within the prep schedule, I think is because it does have intrinsic value, doing strings, and such as French and math and fine arts and sports that are done within the timetable. And I think that was my kind of focusing questions were about, does strings have a intrinsic value? It does have intrinsic value, but is that intrinsic value, or is that value so much superior to other things such as visual art or dance or drama that it warrants this special funding for that? I don't directly answer that question in my recommendations, but that and the question of wanting to find an effective way to make that as part of the program for our elementary experience, such as the arts and music and French, as you said.
Right. Trustee Painter, could I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. So just in terms of the recommendation for prep time, and as you say, is music superior versus dance or art or PE or other subjects? If the trustees do accept your recommendation and move strings into prep time, what is to prevent, because as we know, strings is more complicated to administer than other subjects. We have the rentals of instruments. We have the need for probably specialized teachers, because not all general music teachers would be able to competently teach this subject. We have a lot of different variables that would make strings a more complicated prep time subject than other subjects. You don't really address that in detail in your report. Would you care to comment on how the public, parents, students can feel confident that the strings program would stay a prep time subject rather than only being a prep time subject for a short matter because other subjects would be easier to teach and administer?
I think that that's a valid concern, Paula, and it is what led me to have the recommendation to have guidelines for schools to be doing that, because I am in looking at the data and looking at the role that music has and the importance it plays to many, many parents and their families and to many students as they're moving forward, and that the role that elementary strings has in really being that gateway to further music experiences, and it has an importance in that way. And I do think that it warrants being having a process set up that is clear and communicated clearly for schools, and that there be some way of prioritizing to try to make that work, that it's not just something that happens if the principal or the teachers that happen to be that year support it or don't. And I think that's part of the job of the trustees and the senior management to build that process there. And I'm not, but that was my guideline. That one recommendation around guidelines was kind of a start in that direction.
Great, thank you.
I do think,
thank you, Mr. Harris.
if I can say in relation to your question too, you know, I do recognize that this is a significant change, and I think it's really serendipitous that we're doing this right now with this opportunity with the increased prep time in schools, and but it is going to be a challenging thing, and it is going to be change, and whenever there's change, there are benefits and perceived losses, real benefits and real losses. And that will be the case in this situation if those recommendations are followed.
Thank you. I'll give up the floor to some of the other people around the table. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Paula.
We'll move on to Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Harris, for taking this on
Thank you.
in the twilight of your retirement. So we appreciate it. So yeah, having gone through the review, I was struck as well. I think we've heard from a few folks so far just around the analysis of some of the research, and I certainly understand why one should be testing some of the assumptions that we've heard around the benefits of the cognitive or the academic benefits associated with music study. And I know that your focus was particularly on instruments, studying an instrument. I did wonder what research is available and what it tells us around the mental health and well-being benefits of music study. For me, that's an important piece as well. And it is one aspect of the benefits that we've heard loud and clear, both from parents, but also from students. And so I wonder during your review, not wanting to spend too much more time on the research aspect, because I've heard from you on that, but I wonder, what kind of student voice we heard through the process of the review. I'm minded, how important it is to acknowledge that we've got about a half of our elementary, grade 5 students participating at this point in strings. And I'm wondering what, if anything, we heard from students about the benefits, how they feel about strings.
I did not. I did not reach out to students in my process for this review.
Okay. And then the only other thing I wanted to touch on, and then again, I'm mindful that we've got other folks that want to ask questions, but just around the impact. So on prep time in particular. So I know we've heard quite a lot from folks and teaching staff in particular that prep time and the increased prep time is precious, and it is meant to alleviate some of the pressures that they face in terms of continuing the process of implementing the not so new but still new in many ways curriculum, and just sort of addressing lesson planning in all the sort of subjects that they teach during the day. So I'm wondering if you had an opportunity to consider some of the impacts of potentially using prep time.
Well, I certainly understand prep time and how it works within schools, having been a teacher and in education for over 33 years, and I do understand the importance of that, and I've experienced and how challenging that is when it is compromised with things. There's no reason that I can come up with that strings should add extra challenge to that. One of the challenges for the strings program, and it was communicated by some of our administrators and some teachers, was space availability. And some schools, we actually, one of the schools anyways, who does not have strings now, had stated space being a concern for them. So that is one of the criteria that might be in that guiding process to the in establishing whether strings can work at a school, because prep does have to be outside of the classroom. It doesn't work for teachers to have to leave the classroom to do their prep, or to have to share that space. But I believe in the majority of the schools, but I would have to say I haven't done an analysis of that. I think that would be the next step in setting the guidelines about how many schools would have that space availability. Right now, we have about 50% of our schools who are offering strings within the timetable. And so those schools are finding space for their students outside of the classroom, for the students to have strings. I know sometimes it's not ideal. Sometimes it's in the library, and that becomes that might be a challenge, but it shouldn't be a different challenge if it is prep time than if it is this thing where half the students or some portion of the students are going and some students are with the classroom teacher.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up is Trustee Carmichael.
Thank you, Chair. And Trustee Duncan did ask one of my questions because I was really interested, Mr. Harris, about speaking to students, both students who chose to use the strings and those who did not. But I'm also really interested in how many parents, both with students in a musical program and those not in a musical program in SD61, how many parents were we talking to, and the ratio of, we'll say, music to non?
So the main communication out to parents was through the thought exchange. There was a meeting with some of our, well, Paula and a couple other people from the VC PAC that happened. But those were the only face-to-face parental conversation that we had, was with that small group. And otherwise feedback was through the thought exchange.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry if I missed it. Trustee Carmichael, did you get an answer, a satisfactory answer to number of parents?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, now I know.
Yeah.
Okay, next on our list is Trustee Gagnon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Mr. Harris for this. I did learn to challenge some of my assumptions on music education going through this. There's no doubt a lot of research that is being done on it, and as we see, the FAR effect comes into question what the benefit is. But I look at some of the words that you put in the report, saying students who participate in strings enjoy their experience and have a unique opportunity to learn in community the basics of a skill they would probably not acquire elsewhere. That is one of the things that is going to resonate with me the most out of this report, is that we are looking at a program that is not an individual sport. This isn't one kid going writing the exam in strings and moving on. This is a group. It is always a group of individuals that are benefiting the social environment and also all of the other reading, feeling of what music and what strings can provide. And I know that in your survey of principals, we saw that there was a number of responses from these principals saying how their students are coming to them and expressing their appreciation for the program. And I'm just curious why, when that feedback was getting taken in, that wasn't incorporated into some of the studies, and why you didn't go into that social element of the benefits of some of those studies, like why you focused when you saw that and you just still stuck with the FAR effect element.
Well, I did include the one study that I could find that that was looking at the social emotional. I searched for that. I also did search for the mental health benefits. I couldn't find any studies that were looking at school-age children and mental health benefits of music. They might be out there, and I did include the one study that I did find that was showing some evidence that there is social emotional benefit, small social emotional benefit for strings, not strings. I'm sorry, for music instruction.
Thank you. Yeah, that's just basically what I was curious about.
Trustee Kwan.
I'm conscious that you had a very little time to really put this all together, and my hat's off to you for that reason, because, you know, I would say that there's a substantial amount of information in here considering how much time you actually had to put everything together and to meet with everyone. And so just for my benefit and informationally, I was just curious, it sounds like you didn't get a chance to meet with any students, and I think you said you met with Paula. As far as parents go, and maybe a couple others in person,
right.
or
Yes.
yeah, so 3 or so. And then I was
Paula,
just
yeah.
sorry.
Was
Yeah.
it Paul? I think it was 3 or 4. Was it 3, Paula, or 4? I'm not trying to remember. Yeah, it was like that. It was that.
Sorry, I had my mute on. It was myself along with 3 other VCPAC parents, including Tracy Humphreys, our VCPAC president, and then 2 elementary strings parents in the district.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. And then I was just curious as well, like, and then did you consult with anyone else? Was there, you know, principals, vice principals, or was it just the survey you did with principals and vice principals? Teachers, and how many of those teachers were music teachers? How many district staff?
So the principals were they were surveyed through a specific survey to elementary principals. And I asked the principals to fill 1 survey per their school. To do that, ideally, they would do that with their both the principal and the vice principal together. The other question was about staff. So there were 4 opportunities that were put out for staff to be able to meet with me. And from that, I had 21 staff members that came forward to meet with me. 10 of those were strings teachers in the district, elementary strings teachers. Their feedback, and you'll see all of their comments in the appendices. One of theirs is on theirs, and those comments at the end of each meeting, I read over what those comments would be, so they were in agreement that those were important points in there. So all of the points that were presented at any of those meetings were all presented, are all detailed in there. And then my summary of that, it tries to just do that in a quick way to summarize that. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. And did you differentiate? So when you said staff, that included staff, whether they're at a school or whether they're, you know, district wide, all, you know, pretty much everyone, or
all of the staff that I accessed, that I talked with on there were teaching staff.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And did you meet with any other staff besides the teaching staff and principals, vice principals?
So Deputy Superintendent and I met on a regular basis to go over things. But I want to say that senior management was very careful not to bias we're really careful not to say what they wanted or didn't want the report to be, but or what the recommendations were. And they had a bit of an editing role in it, but I saw all those edits and would approve or not. And about 90% of them were strictly, you know, structural or mechanical issues and that. So.
Okay, sorry. And then just one follow-up question, and then I'll let some others again. And I just thought with most of the parent feedback, you use Thought Exchange, and why did you use that or choose that particular app or format to receive feedback?
That was a recommendation by our communications officer and our deputy superintendent as the effective way to be doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to our GVK rep tonight, Cindy Romp.
Hello, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. What to say? So now, when you were speaking, as we've had this conversation and as we're conversing here, you've talked about the intrinsic positives of music, but I don't see that in this review. This review in the first few pages, it makes it seem like the only reason this program is there is to boost academic achievement. Your first question, does it have significant cognitive and academic achievement? And then on page 20, academic review, and it talks about the same thing. It just feels like there's a push and a focus on what is deemed like the focus seems to be more on academics just in this review, what's printed on the page. And I feel that's wrong because not all students will go to university. And I feel like it's almost placing a value on other subject areas. And it's a bit classist and very colonial way of thinking.
Can I ask for clarification? Which question are you talking about? Because my recommendations question doesn't mention cognitive or academic. It just says
it says on
benefit.
on page 11, it says, does learning to play a musical instrument have significant cognitive and academic benefits to students?
All
I
right.
mean, right before the page before the recommendations. And you don't talk about in here that, like what you said and what you said you believe are the intrinsic benefits of music.
Yes, and I do in my report, I do on page 16, report summary, there is intrinsic value in learning to play a musical instrument. Learning to play a violin, viola, or cello comes with benefits that might include improvements into strength and posture, hand-eye coordination, social skills, and creativity, as well as an increased awareness, appreciation of genres of music, and the sheer pleasure of making music. Students can also develop a sense of pride in learning a new skill and demonstrating that skill in a performance setting. While it is certainly true that there is value in learning to play a strings instrument, there is also intrinsic value in many other activities such as dance, drama, visual art, and sport, which led me to the question about, is there special value for strings above these other areas? I'm sorry, I can't find where I said the question, is there cognitive or academic, except within the report, except within the academic review.
Okay. Just on a side note, I think Dr. Scott Edgar has done a lot of research on social emotional learning in music. Just a side note. Now, for a different hat, because that was my music LSA president hat, concerning prep time. This as prep, I'm a little bit concerned because, and I know you said that not all, because I was scared that you wanted it to be this blanket, like all elementary schools will have prep in grade 5 as strings. So I'm glad that you mentioned that it's only in some, but I fear that there's going to be some pushback because many elementary schools already have a well-established grade 5 general music program, and they're scared to, because some of the like not all elementary teachers are trained to teach strings, and on top of that, not all elementary schools have music as prep. So would it have to go through this process? Because I feel like the schools have autonomy on what programs they offer, right? So yeah.
So may I answer that, or
yes.
try to, at least we can talk about that? There are currently 2 schools that do not have strings. I'm sorry, that do not have a specialist music teacher with prep, providing prep. Only 2 of our elementary schools.
Okay.
It might be a third with Cloverdale. I'm not Cloverdale, with Bank School that only has grade 1 and 2 right now or something. But of the schools that have up to grade 5, there are only 2 of them that don't have a dedicated string music specialist. It is true that you can't just kind of make a teacher teach strings suddenly. if you've got a music teacher, and all but 2 of our schools do provide prep in music, and that music prep is also being, all of those students, which I was surprised to find out, all of those students who are doing strings are also, according to the school principals, getting the same amount of general music instruction as their grade 5 classmates who are not taking strings. So this is music added on top of the general music instruction that's happening for all students. This is why I didn't really think about those options about adding into prep until I kind of was really looking at it near the end of the process and really kind of made that realization of the increased prep time that's coming up and that opportunity. And there are sometimes changes in staffing that open up prep opportunities to be reposted as something else. Those postings are at the judgment or discretion of the principal, who will do that through consultation with staff and a process. And I'm hopeful that there is a process that can be developed to do that in a way that is moving it away from what assumptions teachers might have about the benefits, but are actually looking at, this is an important thing and it has many intrinsic values, as I did put in as started my report summary with a list of those intrinsic values, and that those intrinsic values are important enough to have that process in place and to seek those opportunities to provide it for all students. If it has value, it has value for all students, probably not just, in my opinion, for students who want to choose that.
So my next question is, there are a lot of grade 4-5 splits in schools. So I'm wondering, how would that work with if we're offering it as prep?
Yes, and that would be, I think, one of the things that would have to be brought into that process and the guidelines. But myself, I can think of a few ways of doing that. You would have, at a school that had a strings prep, there's also other prep that's happening too. There is that possibility of having the grade 4s going to one prep provider, maybe to the music teacher who's doing prep, and the grade 5s going to the strings teacher in if there are more than one grade 4 or 5 class. That is a possibility. The other possibility is of having the 4s as part of that prep also, of strings also. Strings doesn't, historically, we offered in the school district strings to grade 4s for many years in many of our schools. And there's no reason that couldn't happen again.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Back to Paula Marchese for another round.
Let me get my mute off. Okay. Thank you, Trustee Painter. So I have 2 other questions, if I might be permitted to ask them. The first one I wanted to ask is concerns the thought exchange. I know that I believe Trustee Kwan had asked Mr. Harris about that. And I just wanted to give some parent, perhaps, perspective on the thought exchange and then ask a question about it. So we have heard from parents, and especially we did hear from parents during the music review thought exchange process. And while I was really heartened to see over 1,000 comments that got entered into the thought exchange, which I don't have a lot of experience with the thought exchange, but that seemed like a lot of comments when you looked at it. Yet what we heard from parents is that they found it very difficult to offer substantive comments when they were limited to 150 characters. the other thing about the thought exchange is that the user does not have any control over which thoughts to rate. The app just gives you a certain number of thoughts that you can look at, and you're not able to go into the whole database and say, this is a thought I want to rate. And there's no way that a parent could even rate all of the thoughts, which I actually looked a bit at the thought exchange program today, just because I was kind of curious about it. And I think that for some companies who use this app, a user could actually rate all the thoughts if you only had, say, 30 thoughts in there. But so the other thing that I just wanted to share is that this kind of platform did lead to many inaccuracies with its one-way communication. I did see comments in there from parents that said things such as, this program is inequitable, this program is only for wealthy schools, this program is only offered at a small number of schools, the cost of instruments is not, is not affordable for our family. When in truth, this year, the program was equitable. It was offered at all schools but 2. VCPAC did raise money for instrument rentals. All of these things parents don't seem to know. So I guess I would just ask, I don't know if Mr. Harris, you can answer this, or perhaps senior staff could, but why is this program seen as a good way to get parent feedback?
May I defer to someone else to answer that?
I can start if you wish. So thank you, Paula, for bringing this up. I think that from what I understand, this provides an ability to receive a lot of information from participants. And it is better able to theme the information. So as you can imagine, in a short amount of time, to receive feedback from potentially thousands of people and to be able to theme it and see where people and what people are saying is the most manageable. We don't have someone who is a full-time staff member who's going to do a survey, have it out and be able to theme it back in the time that we have. We've heard that is user-friendly. And again, I don't work for Thought Exchange, and I certainly am not trying to support it. This is the information we have, is that many organizations, educational organizations, use it. It's user-friendly, it's safe, it's secure, and it allows for people to provide feedback in a manageable way and also to present it in a manageable way.
Thank you, Deb. Thanks. So, Trustee Painter, could I then ask I have another question, but it's actually on a different topic. A couple of other people around the table have asked a bit about the parent feedback and what that looked like during this music review. And VCPAC wishes to address the consultation, or more accurately, the lack of consultation in this review. I'm specifically not talking about the parent feedback, which is important, and as we've talked about, was in the thought exchange, but I'm talking specifically about VCPAC's input into this process. VCPAC is a stakeholder at this table. Elementary strings and music education are subjects that VCPAC has more than a passing interest in. Many of you know this, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. Over the past 2 years, our parents and children have demonstrated to the district that this is an issue they care passionately about, as Mr. Harris has said in his report. They have told the district through presentations and literally hundreds of letters, and I actually went and started to count the letters, and I came up to over 700 letters. These letters all say that they want students to have the opportunity to learn an instrument at an early age. Why did you not choose to include this correspondence in your report or include any consultation with students? When the music review was first announced, district staff said that the consultant would be speaking to all of the stakeholders. However, VCPAC as a body was never contacted by Mr. Harris. In fact, when President Tracy Humphreys emailed him, she never got a response to her email. As the chair of AMIS, I made it my mission to talk to Mr. Harris, and I made persistent efforts to communicate with him. We were finally granted a meeting last week But honestly speaking, it was at the 11th hour and presumably after Mr. Harris had reached all of his conclusions and wrote the majority of his report. There is no mention of our meeting in this report. Mr. Harris met with me, the chair of AMIS. He met with Tracy Humphreys, the president of VCPAC. He met with an Indigenous parent. He met with and the two parents we had at the table were two early childhood educators. We had a wealth of information and perspective to share with him, but we're nowhere in this report. This is disappointing, frustrating, and personally deeply disrespectful. As the parents who have fought against cuts to music education for the last 2 years, and as the parents who secured private funding so that this program could continue for an additional year, we honestly expect more. As we have demonstrated over the past 2 years, our members have great ideas. We know how to think out of the box. We are grateful to be working collaboratively with this new board who have fresh ideas and new perspectives. But honestly, this lack of consultation with the district is a step backward and not forward. VCPAC continues to have issues with all of the money that was spent on legal fees during the recent judicial review and all of the surrounding issues. This has led the district to the point of needing to cut highly valued programs like elementary strings. In addition, we have seen cuts to custodial, inclusive ed support, and other areas that directly impact students. We honestly expect better from the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And we'll move along now to Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I had a couple of just additional questions, if I may, around, and this is again directed to Mr. Harris. I wonder if through the process of your review, you had an opportunity to consider some of the existing district policies and regs that relate to music programming. In particular, what came to my mind as I read the review was around the rental of district-owned instruments. I wonder whether we have, whether you had an opportunity to consider the relevant policies and regs, and then further, whether there is any strings-based instruments in our rental pool.
There are strings-based instruments in our rental pool. I don't have the number of those, but, and I did not look at policies and regs that directly addressed that issue.
Okay, so we're not sure how many, you know.
I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, no, that's helpful. We'll just add that to our list so that we, you know, we can make further inquiries. And I appreciate that the turnaround time here was short. And so, yeah, and I think that was probably my last question for this evening. I guess since I have the floor, the only other thing I wanted to just sort of broach, and again, I don't know, Mr. Harris, if you have any input, but I was wondering whether there was any consideration or discussion during the process of the review around what elementary music programming would look like in the case of, you know, where students participating in strings didn't also participate in extra general music programming. So I wonder what the timetable and you know, what that would look like if, say, you know, we continue to have, you know, almost 50% of grade 5 students interested in participating in strings in particular, while other grade 5 students took part in other more general music programming.
I'll try to answer the question. I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but what I'm understanding is what might be the implications on their learning and the programming if we've got some, if the students are not doing what most students are doing now with the general music instruction with a qualified music teacher, but are doing the strings instead. Is that the core question? If
I might clarify, no, I wasn't I didn't necessarily want to know what, although if you have a view on what, if there were any impacts on their learning, I'm going to assume that, you know, whether a student is taking part in strings, and that is the core part of their music programming for grade 5, or they're participating in other music endeavors, whether that be drumming or, you know, or their more general music instruction, maybe they pick up a ukulele and they're learning ukulele, that there are benefits, and that we're meeting the aim of the curriculum around the arts and around music education. No, mine was more of a logistical question around what would it look like from a scheduling and a budget perspective if the strings students we're not getting additional time, music education time. So you mentioned that right now the general music program is participated in by all grade 5 students, including the strings students. So the students who have chosen to spend some of their learning around music playing a strings instrument. So I'm wondering logistically and also from a budget perspective, what grade 5 music would look like if in fact the string students didn't also get essentially extra music instruction.
All right, I think I understand now. With strings music instruction happens within the preparation schedule. So that is an FTE, a staffing issue. So there could be some. We have some of our music teachers who are providing music general prep who also at their school do strings instruction. And there's at least one who I talked with who does that, at least in part, kind of related within their prep schedule in part. I don't have exact details with them, but the, my most familiarity most recently is at Sir James Douglas School. So there they have a 1.0 music teacher. They also have providing 1.0 prep FTE. They also have a 0.4 library preparation time that's done through the teacher librarian. They also have a 0.3, I think this year was like about 0.275 or something in PE. All of those jobs would probably stay as they are, those prep. And so that's all within the staffing formula that comes to the school in the early spring. But in addition to that, there are going to be minutes that are added this year because of the extra prep time for all teachers. So at a largish school like Sir James Douglas, that will be more minutes that have to be allocated. So those minutes can be allocated to some strings instruction time for grade 5s. It won't impact negatively anybody else's job, but it doesn't have to anyways to be doing it that way. It's just adding to prep time. Is that the answer to your question? Does that help?
I think it does. I mean, Chair, if I may follow up, just to clarify, to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. So bear with me as a non-educator who doesn't have all the years of experience you have around juggling the logistics of scheduling and staffing in the context of education. I suppose what I glean from your answer is that it wouldn't necessarily be possible in the context of every elementary school in our district to have strings instruction going on at the same time as general music instruction, because there's overlap. So some of the generalist or specialist music instruction at elementary, it might be in fact the same teacher as also teaches strings. What I was trying to get at was, is there a way to ensure that we're not doubling up? So strings students are not getting extra general music instruction, but all grade 5s are getting the same amount of music instruction, whether that be a more general program or whether that be a strings focus.
Well, right now we do have a situation where the strings students are getting that extra music time, because they're getting all of the same prep music time that their colleagues are getting. plus the strings time, which is almost never done during strings prep time. A couple of years I was able to manage that at Sir James Douglas, which was to have strings time during their classes prep time of music, but it wasn't always possible. So they are going to be getting, so a grade 5 class might get 3 prep during the week. One of them might be in strings, or 2 of them might be in strings, and another one might be in PE, or might be in general music, or might be in library sciences. And that's what happens within schools now, where you've got 2 or 3 different prep providers, and there's a specific amount of time each teacher is allocated for prep time, and then that is divided, the students go to different programs during the week for their prep, and sometimes it's all in one program, such as music, and sometimes it's mixed between different ones. But there actually should be, there would be a cost savings in teaching, in staffing, because it's not, you're not paying for 2 teachers to teach the same group at the same time. That's why it keeps coming up year after year in the budgeting process, because those strings teachers FTE is one of the few elementary FTE that come out of the that are not covered in the provincial staffing process, because they're only teaching some of the class and the teacher is still there teaching. So that will eliminate that expense. And my recommendation was, if that the direction that the trustees wish to go, some of that money that is saved could be used to help support some of those challenges that some schools are going to have, to be able to get music stands and to be able to maybe have certain things in place to be able to have that, and to ensure that all parents have access to strings instruments.
Thank you. I did have Trustee Gagnon on, but not sure if he's still on the list. I'll move on to Trustee Kwan, and Trustee Gagnon, if you are interested in one last comment, let me know.
I actually was just texting with him. He had to take a work call. I guess he's on call. So I have his question for you. Yeah. And so I just, first of all, just want to say, I know this is a long process. We have a lot of questions for you. Thank you for being so patient with us. So basically, this is a question I think many of us have, and it might end up with some hands going down, but I noticed that you recommended a K-12 music review, and why were you recommending it? I didn't really get that kind of from your review, and why would you recommend a K-12 music review?
There are implications around initially looking at strings, and I thought, if all that happens is strings is canceled, I think it's important to be looking at what the implications of that is, and what could be happening within the whole system to be helping with that, and what the fallout or the cascading effect. Some of the music, strings, and general music instruction doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it's part of an ongoing system. And I know from our conversation with the VC PAC parents, it was really clear from them about the some of them seeing that strings was really important to have in elementary school, because of its opening up and starting that connection to individualized music instruction, or instrument and music instruction at that elementary age, where they're already feeling safe and comfortable and connected, that having that there is going to increases that likelihood for moving forward with that. The a thought was in my head and it just left out. But there also is there's a lot of music programs that happen at middle school, and some of them connect with the elementary strings. Strings is very popular in grade 7, moving in middle school, and then drops off very quickly after that. And we don't know why that happens. A lot of that dropping off that happens as children move along is because of increasing options that they have. They can only choose so many things to do during the day. And some of the realities of strings instruction in elementary schools also exist there in the middle schools, where now they've got strings, and they've got band, and they've got choir, and they've got jazz band, and they've got sectionals, and they've got musical theater, and there's a lot of choices there for students there. And what is the impact? We're looking at a whole system. We're not just, strings is not just exist in isolation.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate you answering that. And since that was Trustee Gagnon's question, I'm gonna be facetious and insert my own here, if that's all right.
Actually, Trustee Kwan, I'm going to hold you to the end,
Okay.
because I have given you a couple opportunities. I'm going to move on to Cindy at this point, but I haven't forgotten you.
Thank you. I'm just thinking about how you mentioned that through the new collective agreement we're getting, elementary teachers are getting more prep time. Now, I have a few questions about that. So if each elementary teacher gets more prep time, does that mean the school schedule has to change?
Yes, it does change.
And so would that mean the prep time that's given to teachers would be extended for that time rather than, so I'm trying to think, like, because you're saying that this additional prep time can be given towards strings in some way for prep time. Now, according to the current, this is my experience with the staff committee process, if the music teacher turns down that additional prep time, then additional FTE would typically go to the person with the highest seniority that is not a 1.0 FTE. And the staff committee also decides, or they recommend what prep subject will be taught, whether it's music, PE, ADST, etc. So if the staff committee chose not to do strings, then that program would potentially be lost at that school. So, and you also mentioned that in our meeting that if we make it prep, then it's because it's no longer a budget line, then we don't have to fight for the program anymore, as you were saying, every year. But that budget line also ensures some funding that goes towards that program. So what my question is, how can we ensure that this program won't be lost if through this staff committee process, or if it's not a budget line anymore?
I believe that was one of the early questions, was that question, but I think what's new in your question are the issues around how to do that, how to make that decision. So yes, the staff committee is part of that consultative process. Staff committee does not make the decision. The principal makes that decision. And yes, if there is a teacher with the FTE space in their job to be able to take that on, and they have the qualifications for what that new posting is going to be, then they could take that posting. That we have teachers have the allocation at their school of how much FTE, each teacher of how much FTE they have the right to. So and the new postings that come up are new staffing, and they can apply for that, or they can get that if it topping up. And there are particular rules. I need to be careful about saying too much, because there's some that can and some that can't, and there's letters of agreement with the GVTA on how all that works and that. But it is, again, within the process that I think should be put in place of putting guidelines that would be looking at that process, because I am leery of it being just a whim, lack of a better word, of staff or of a principal coming in and just, we don't really, it's like having strings, or would rather have this and do that instead. So yes, it's a possibility that strings that started at a school might drop at a school. And that is something that I think should be part of the process in looking at that. That's not just something that just can that easily be dropped.
Okay, thank you.
So Trustee Mabobi.
Thank you, Chair. We've been sitting here listening to a lot of questions for a long time. So I thank you, Mr. Harris, for doing the report and putting up with so many questions. This actually, it brings me to another question, which is, I feel like I've learned a lot in the past hour and a half with everyone bringing up all of the questions and all of the concerns. And I'm wondering, after having heard all of these questions, do you still stand by your recommendations? And do you still feel that your report is complete?
I stand by the recommendations. I do feel that these are the best ways that I could see to be able to support a strings education within our elementary schools in a way that's maintainable moving forward. My conversation that had the majority of the that was majority of strings teachers, it was probably the hardest conversation I've had for a long time, seeing their fatigue with this for a number of years now, having to be re-justifying their positions. And I don't think that that's over completely. And I think it's really unfortunate that that is the experience they've gone through. And that is, in my opinion, because it is within the operating budget. And when we are in a tight when the district is in a tight financial situation, inevitably and by necessity, it will be considered. It is up there because it is part of the budget. And my hope is that there is a way to move forward to maintain a strings presence in as many schools as we can, in a way that's going to give the best stability for that moving forward, because no programs do not benefit from that kind of instability. And it's very challenging for teachers to want to stay in the program. I heard from teachers, strings teachers, who said they're working in Victoria because it is one of the very few, if not the only, public school district in the province that does currently have a strings program. And they've come to us because of that and value that, their time here and their experience here. So I still do support those recommendations.
Thank you.
Trustee McNally.
Thanks. I'll have to figure out how to get my little hand out of there in a minute. But this is, I hope, on track, on theme. We've heard mention of students sort of, I guess, double dipping on music by having strings and also participating in a classroom, full class music program. And what I would ask through the chair to anyone who can answer this, what does the classroom music program look like and who teaches it? And then I have a comment.
So I think I'm able to answer that question through my work. All but two of our schools have a music specialist teaching those music class, that music prep time. It does, what it looks like is laid out in the the BC curriculum, music is one of the 4 threads in the arts program. And most of our music teachers would be doing, are going to be doing music reading, singing, dance, music appreciation, rhythm, beat, tone, all those things. And all of our schools are providing that from kindergarten to grade 5 inclusive. Was that all of your, Diane? Yeah.
So I just had a comment after, but I just want to clarify that I've understood this, that the classroom-based music program then is taught by a teacher with a degree, minor or specialty in
Yes.
music.
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
great. That's good to know, because in my day, which was a long time ago, it was just kind of wing it, which was what I was hoping not to hear.
And it's
Yeah, so
not,
that's great.
it isn't always the case though. That is the case this year, but I know at least 1 or 2 of the schools that have a music teacher this year didn't last year. And it isn't necessarily the case every single year.
So, that concerns me, because I know if I were back in the day teaching music, the kids would not be getting quality of instruction that they would be getting from a true music specialist who would be teaching, say, the strings program. And just a comment, long ago with, I think in this discussion, the line item issue was at least mentioned, and hasn't been a big topic, I don't think, in this discussion, but I have some experience with budgets, past budgets, and services being mushed in with something else and no longer being a line item. And if it isn't a line item, you can't see it. And I've seen a program dear to my heart disappear gradually over years. So just to everybody here who values a program, you want to see a line item or it may drift away. Thank you.
Trustee Kwan.
Right. I have 2 really short ones, so I think we can wrap it up. And I just want to say thank you to everyone's patience with me. I know everybody had questions, but I know I had the most. So just in your review, you mentioned that 8 schools have more than 50% participation in strings. I wondered if you found out how long those programs have been in those 8 schools have been running, and if there was any other schools who had less than 50% participation who had been running as long. You can probably see where I'm going with this program. Yes. Is it possible that, given time, other schools could have more than 50% participation, depending on how long the programs ran?
Yeah, and I did look at that. I'm just trying to find my numbers where that page is. Oh, here it is.
56.
Yeah, thank you. It seems my pagination is different than yours, so
okay.
it's not always working when you're unfortunately, but I do have it. It's Appendix B, where I have a table here. So if in the you'll see in the first columns, so it goes school name and then how many grade 5 students in last year. So those schools, there are schools that had the program in previous years, and those schools have been having their program for at least before like 2020 year 2000, and I didn't have numbers exactly of the schools before that, but we know that it's amazing the history that Victoria has with strings being here. I learned a lot about that being here over 100 years, not always as a structured program. It started off as people doing strings private lessons and then having opportunities to have a band together at Vic High and then I was most recently principal at Sir James Douglas School, which I was pleased to see had been the school in Victoria with the longest running uninterrupted strings program, and it's been there since the early 50s as part of that strings program. The one of the things that was interesting to me as I kind of gathered this data, I saw numbers that there were schools that dropped from last year, I'll see if I can find one now. So that dropped from 73% participation rate last year to 56% participation rate this year, or 82% participation rate last year to 36% participation rate this year. And that was really, I was really curious about that. And so I phoned up those principals directly and said, why do you think this has happened? And in all of those cases, those those schools went from offering the strings within the bell schedule to outside of the bell schedule. So that is why you've got, even though before you used to have only 16 schools, now you've got all of them, whatever the number is, 28 or something, 27 schools offering, 25, thank you, Cindy, offering strings, but basically with the same, almost the same percentage rate, from 45, only an increase of 2 percentage points of participation rate. And that's because I think that it's more schools have gone to a participation outside of the bell schedule. And from talking with and getting the feedback from principals, the reason that they've done that is because their sense of it, and the sense of many of their grade 5 teaching staff, is it is very disruptive having strings in the timetable, and the problem that is in moving forward with new topics and with interesting projects becomes problematic. And that is the rationale they give for wanting to move it outside the schedule, but it does reduce participation significantly.
That's a really good point. Thank you. And this wasn't one of my questions, and it's probably more a comment for further, but you know, thinking about pullouts, I'm sure there's other things that happen in the school for pullouts. One thing that comes to mind is learning assistance and how that disrupts classrooms and that kind of thing too. So, you know, something to keep in mind as far as comparison. I'm sure that wasn't part of your purview.
No, but as also an inclusive learning teacher, I know that we don't do pullout anymore because of that reason for learning support. And we know that pullout for learning support has a significant and negative impact on students that we're pulling out, and is not the best way to do learning support from any perspective. That's why we have inclusive learning, and that's why we try to do push in most. There are times when it is the best way in a few situations, but for the vast majority, it isn't, that for that very reason.
Thank you. And then just quickly, you know, I noticed you did some comparison of other school districts in BC. Yes. And you know, over the past couple of years with all of the music talk and that kind of thing going on, I think we did learn what districts did and didn't do in BC. And I just wondered if you got a chance to actually look outside of BC, what other districts perhaps in Canada or the States, you know, are doing in comparison for that.
And I did look as far east as Quebec. I did all the provinces going across Quebec. It started getting kind of onerous as you look in the maritime provinces. Sure. The situation, the curricula are almost identical from province to province. And what's interesting in our BC curriculum, which is similar to others, what changes from province to province is at what point specific music and I'm sorry, not specific, focused music instruction, such as becomes part of the curriculum. So moving away from general music instruction to focused music instruction. And that changes if jurisdictions have a focus on a middle school model or not a middle school model sometimes. But BC, we have focused music instruction, such as part of the curriculum, is not there until grade 10. And that's similar in other provinces also. Sometimes it's grade 8, sometimes it's grade 9, sometimes grade 10, but it depends a bit. Like in Quebec, for example, you start high school in grade 7. Everyone's in high school in grade 7, so that's where it changes there. So typically it changes at that high school where most people are going into high school entry. For us in our middle schools, we have an interesting situation that we have a lot of music opportunities, but if students are not choosing to opt into one of those music opportunities, they may not be getting any music instruction. So in about 50% of our middle schools, if they're not opting to do band or strings or choir as a course, then they're not getting any music instruction, which means they're not meeting the ministry criteria.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Again, I appreciate everyone's patience and understanding, and I am done.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Really appreciate this. I did have one question. I was itching to ask about the decline in the numbers, and I was like, oh, she got me. But what I did want to follow up on is if music moved to a prep time situation, would the district not have an elevated obligation as far as providing the instruments themselves? I'm just thinking back to, our fabled John Young standard.
Yeah, so legally, yes, there is that. We do, because any course that has equipment that's needed for that course does need to be provided by the school district. And we already meet that obligation when we already provide those instruments when any parent asks for it. In the same way, we have the obligation to be providing pencils and papers and pens and erasers. Most parents don't ask for that to be provided by the school, but they are informed that they can ask for it, and we do provide those upon request without any question. So it would be in that similar same nature as that, but we do that already in our schools.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, did I hear you indicate that you had participation numbers back to 2000 or roughly there?
I have FTE numbers. I don't have participation numbers. I know how many staff were paid for back to 2000. I think it was 2000. What our FTE coming out of the operation budget was up until then, and it stayed almost. That FTE has changed very little in the last 23 years, as far back as I go with data. There were a couple of schools, I'm trying to remember, I think Strawberry Vale, I don't see them on here, but I think there were a couple of schools that had strings programs and then didn't have and then joined. I'm sorry, it didn't have and then joined, say in about 2003. I was only able to find FTE, not actual student participation.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I just, especially given the rationale or the circumstances with COVID and everything else, I just feel like we're a system in flux, and that it's helpful to have those 2 years, but it would have been, and I'm sure you probably have the same mind, that if it was possible to have longer term data, we could get a better understanding of trends. I'm curious if that one change, the precipitous change from in bell to out of bell, if that would have proceeded or if we would see an uptake over time. One of the observations I have is that I do recall it was challenging at the start of the year to actually recruit teachers for these positions, given the rather circuitous route they would have to take between schools to actually accumulate more than like a 0.1 at different schools. And I'm curious whether or not some of the pressure around scheduling was simply a consequence of there's only so many time slots outside of Bell. And if you're trying to fit a finite number of teachers within those finite number of time slots, it becomes a bit of a programming challenge. Not insurmountable, but definitely a complication that we had to deal with. Thank you very much for your presentation, your report, and your lengthy response to all these questions. As we move along, and this is not at all directed, this is a general observation, not directed anywhere, but I am mindful that in the past 4 years, and Paula Marchese mentioned this as well, that we've eliminated or reduced specialty inclusive ed programming for behavioral and gifted, the base plus counseling model that put a counselor into every school at least 50% of the time, and was personally the thing I was proudest about in my first term. We've lost that. Reading recovery has been drastically reduced. And there we're talking about specialized literacy for the students struggling the most to acquire literacy. We've reduced front office admin time, custodial services, music programming, and then this whole pattern of reductions within our school, the delivery of services to our students in the schools is something that is very troubling for me. And I recognize that just in this conversation and with the report, that the delivery of strings is something that I do think we need to consider how we're going to do it in an equitable fashion and in a manner that best suits the needs of our students and fits within the realities of delivering public service. But I'll be loath to ever say that we're going to kill it. But I do think we need to put a little more effort into it. And I do like the idea of developing some direct guidelines on how we can actually look at delivering it in an effective and efficient manner. So thanks once again. I see that at 8:42, we have spent a lot of time on that. I recognize that we will have at least one other topic of significant discussion, but I'm going to propose a 5-minute break right now for everyone to take a shake and grab a drink. And I have 8:42, so at 8:47, we will re-adjourn if that is the will of the committee. Show of hands, all in favor of 5-minute break? We have a unanimous consent to that. So I will see everyone at 8:47. Don't log off, just turn off your cameras, turn off your mics, and we'll be back in a moment. So clearly I have to remember to put less water in the kettle if I'm trying to get a quick cup of tea in here. So. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just noted that the superintendent had her hand up before the break, and so I just didn't want us to move on without making sure she had an opportunity to provide comments.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention. My apologies, Superintendent.
No worries. In between a break and tea, I'm fine with waiting, but thank you. Just wanted to clarify, though, that there isn't any misinformation. We still have Base Plus model for counseling. So teacher counselors are still 50% in elementary. I think one of the challenges that we have that we recognize is staffing. So we're not always able to secure teacher counselor staffing, but the staffing FTE is in all elementary schools as 0.5 minimally. So Base Plus still exists. And then just with regards with the programs, and we can spend another meeting talking about that, but it wasn't a result of a budget decision that moved away from behavior programs. So I would suggest that we pay or support that more than we have in the past. So I just wanted to make sure people were clear that neither the budget decision did not impact programs for supporting students with behavior, nor did the move away from Base Plus model. That still exists.
Thank you for that clarification. And clearly, I look to you when I misspeak to set me straight. And actually, no, I clearly had a different understanding of the level of counseling we were delivering. So I appreciate that. Okay, I see nothing under personnel, so we will move on to finance and legal affairs. E1 with a monthly financial report.
Thank you. So in your agenda package is the monthly financial report for the period ended December 2022. The prior year numbers have come directly from the December 2021 report that was provided in the January 2022 ops agenda package. And the current year is at our December month end. So just a reminder that the budget that's included in the 22-23 budget column is the preliminary budget or annual budget plus any changes since then. And the actuals are from July 1st to December 31st. So if we take a look at revenue, based on the budget, we're still expecting to receive about 53% of our revenue compared to 51% at the same time last year. And you want to go to the very end, we're looking at total expenses. So our expense budget that is still available to spend in the current year, we're looking at 56%, and that's compared to 57% last year. So quite close, both the revenue and the expenses. So this is here for your information. If you have any questions, let me know.
We'll start with Trustee Gagnon.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very random question. Line item 551 on page 109 of the packet is gas. And this December, the district spent $205,000 compared to last December spending $154,000. And I know it's a minor thing, but I'm just curious where and why that number increased by like 133% or not. Yeah, that number increased by 33%, say. Is it because it was a cold December? Just wondering.
Yeah, that would be my best guess, because I know when we looked at this line previously, it was really low compared to the prior year because of such a mild fall right through into October. So without looking at the detailed bills, I would guess it's exactly that, that we had higher usage of gas in December this year than we did last year. But we would have to look at the bills just to be sure.
Yeah, no worries. It makes sense to me that combined with inflation and a colder month that would be the case. But I was just wanting to verify that because that seemed, in the grand scheme of things, it's a small amount, but in that little line, it was a big amount.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Trustee Kwan, my apologies.
Worries. So I just wanted to pull out a couple of things and dig a little bit into them. First of all, and mostly on the expense side, just looking at some of those already overages with the first one would be advertising. Reasons why we might be 40,000 over in advertising.
Yeah, I can definitely answer that one. That's related to the election. So when we budgeted for the election, we budgeted in one line under, I believe, miscellaneous services and didn't break it out into the various accounts. So there isn't budget sitting in there for the elections advertising at this point.
Perfect. And then the second line item was agent fee. I know we talked a little bit about this last time, and I don't think it was quite that overage yet last time we had this report. And I just wondered if, is there, like, I know we talked a little bit about the international fees and that revenue that we get in. Is there a correlation? Because it seems to me it's going up higher compared to what our fees are collecting as opposed to last year. It just seems the correlation seems to be the percentage seems to be higher, the agent fee on what we're collecting as opposed to previous year.
There could be a couple things. I'm not sure if the percentage paid in agent fees has gone up. I don't think so. But they do pay agent fees on the first and second year, and not on any years beyond that. So it would kind of depend on the students who are in the current year. So if in a prior year there were students registered who were in the third and fourth year, we wouldn't see agent fees for them. But if we've recruited a lot of new students, which is a possibility since COVID, then we're going to see some higher agent fees that way. Also, yeah, it is definitely correlated to the revenue. So not all revenue that we get has an agent fee attached, but the higher the tuition revenue, usually the higher the agent fees.
Yeah, that would make sense to me too. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Those are the two that I had.
And Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Trustee Painter. And thanks for the report again this month. I just had a couple of questions. One was just around legal again. I'm just mindful, although we're not over, we're very close to being over, and we're not at the end of the financial yet. So I know we're going to be talking about legal services and from a policy perspective in February, but I just wondered if you have an estimate at this point, knowing what we know now about further need for legal services, if we suspect that we will be over budget again in that regard.
Yeah, so what Julie will do as part of the final budget process is look to see what we might estimate our expenses to be to the end of the year. It's really hard to use prior years as well, because the landscape is totally changing every year as to why we would seek legal advice. But we'll make our best estimate and would likely adjust that budget accordingly in the final budget process. So I would say, based on the expenses that have come in the first half of the year, that if we left the budget alone, we would definitely be over budget.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know. And I know last financial year we did see a similar trend, and we did adjust the budget, and then we still were over that adjusted budget. So yeah, okay, that's helpful to know kind of where we are. The other question I had was just around estimating some of the costs associated with the inflationary pressures that we're seeing as a district. So this kind of, I think, comes back to that kind of advocacy piece that we've talked about, or we started to talk about in the context of our budget discussions. But I'm wondering to what extent it is possible to get some estimate of the true costs of those inflationary pressures. So for instance, I'm thinking, you know, around utilities, around those kinds of costs that, you know, the less glamorous costs that we know we're going to incur every year, and they are escalating. And I would love to think that we could be in a position whereby when we're advocating to the ministry to provide some inflationary funding to districts, that we're able to provide some kind of a calculation. And I just wondered how realistic it is to be able to do so.
Oh, we do some of that work when we do the preliminary budget. So utilities is a perfect example. We will look at historical costs, but we'll also look at, they do announce their fee changes quite far in advance. So we will look at those kind of costs. Sometimes they go down, sometimes they go up. But the other area where we will look at is if we have contracts where they've given us notice of inflationary increases. So one that comes to mind is software maintenance contracts. So with our service providers, they'll usually let us know ahead of time if we're looking at an increase. So that's kind of the area where we will look, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we change the budget for it. So if we think of inflationary costs for outside of that for departments and schools, we're not adding and we're not giving anyone any additional budget to offset inflationary costs. So they're just having to kind of cover off those expenses with the budget that they have. So it would be a fairly rare scenario where we would add budget in for inflationary, and it's really where it's like completely out of our control and usually a significant number.
So is it something, so outside of the budget process, is it something though that we could get some kind of an idea about, so that we can, in our advocacy to the ministry, whether we are including it in our budget or not, in our advocacy to the ministry, be able to say to them, look, you know, these are the escalating costs that we're seeing, and as you pointed out, it's not that we have extra money to account for these increased costs. We're simply having to make do, and the impact of making do is that we're having to, you know, maybe cut a program, or we're having to provide fewer services. So yeah, I appreciate that we might not actually increase the line items, and frankly, there's a good reason why we don't. But I'm just wondering if there's some data that we could provide to the ministry when we're writing to them saying, hey, we need more money to address these cost pressures.
Yeah, I definitely think we could. There's some obvious ones that come to mind, and I'm sure Julie too, if she's working with departments, they're going to be talking to her about areas where they're feeling some cost pressures. So I don't think it would be too hard to start to pull a list together of some of the ones that are obvious, and you know, we could even request some information from departments as well if they're not automatically sharing that with us.
That would be fantastic. Thanks so much, Katrina, and thanks again for the report.
Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, just following up to Trustee Duncan's question, you know, it might even be a per unit cost that we can show what's going up to. I'm particularly thinking about hydro, when you can log in and you can see what the cost per unit is. You know, just some of that information probably would be handy to show kind of what the cost increases have been over, you know, the last 5 years or so. Another thing that comes to mind is technology and how, you know, the cost increases to some of those as well. So yeah. Great question, Trustee Duncan, and thank you so much for that answer. Katrina, I'm having it's been a night. Thank you so much, that's awesome.
And that actually, it raises a question for me, Secretary Treasurer. When it comes to forecasting for the year to come, is inflation one of those considerations that is going into some of the line items? And I don't know if this is the same question or the same answer that you've just given Trustee Duncan, but I'm just curious about, well, after having gone through a period of very stable increases in that regard, with respect to inflation, we're now entering a period of increased volatility. And I'm just wondering what the implications might be for projecting our next budget.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something we're definitely going to have to look at. So again, like I kind of always think about our software, you know, our ERP system that we use, and it's not that easy to just decide to use someone else if the costs go up, and we're kind of stuck with that. So when we're preparing the budget for next year, and we have no choice, we will often adjust that, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other areas where we can adjust the other way. If we're talking about inflationary costs, I think it's a similar question to what Trustee Duncan asked. Like, there are items where we know that they've gone up a lot, like food costs, different things like that. And we just don't make the adjustments. So departments and schools are having to figure out ways to pay for things or do things differently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, let's move on to E2, the 2022-2023 budget change report for December 2022.
Okay. So for this one, for December 2022, the budget change report, there have only been changes in the operating fund, no changes in special purpose or capital. And if you are looking at it, if you jump down into the changes section, the last 6 items are ones that have been added to the December report. So starting at municipal crossing guard contribution for $33,000. There were some miscellaneous donations and revenue of $18,000. $60 theater rental revenue. Cafeteria revenue to December at $21,000. Donation revenue for Cooper Smith, the music library. And what you'll see in the last item is a little different from the others because there's no revenue coming in to offset it. So through our joint job evaluation committee, they reviewed the school admin assistant 3 position, and the rating went up so that it shifted into the next pay grade. So we needed to add in $133,000 budget for expenses, but there's no offsetting revenue for that. I don't know if you have any questions about this report.
Oh, I'll ask one, just with respect to the school admin evaluation. At what level was that done? Is that like a district level or is that a provincial scale thing?
This is at a district level. So there is a process that's in place, and the committee is made up of members of the district staff as well as members of QP 947. And so they review the job evaluation against a set criteria and determine which pay grade it falls at. So it's like a points system.
Understood. Thank you very much for that. Sorry. My apologies, trying to run too many screens at once. Seeing no other hands, let's move on to the 2023-2024 budget update.
Right, that's me again. I just thought I would start to put into the ops agenda some of the items that are happening in the budget process so that you're aware. We don't have any, just trying to keep it not too far into the future because we do have the timeline for that, but just to let you know about the budget advisory committee meetings, where the minutes can be found, what the next topics will be for the next meeting. Also, we've had a few different events in the last couple of weeks. So this Talking Tables event was held on January 6th. There was a representative advisory council of students meeting where we talked about budget on January 9th. And then the student symposium was held last Friday on January 13th. So all of these meetings and events will have reports that will go back to the Budget Advisory Committee, but also to the board. So just letting you know like where to look for that information if you're interested. And of course, if there's anything else that's coming up that's emergent around the budget, we can include it in this as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move along to facilities planning. We'll start with F1, custodial considerations with Superintendent Whitten.
Thank you, Chair Painter. I will bring to your attention on page 114 a memo. The memo outlines information that had been provided by the Manager of Building Operations, Mark Baggett, in a previous meeting. The memo comes as a result of the board motion on December 12th with regards to identifying cost to increase custodial levels to the previous year, 21-22, and also to provide recommendations to the board on using funds out of the revised budget allocations. So the options that were presented by Mark Baggett are 0 through 4 on the page 115, page 2 of the memo. I bring to your attention option 5, which is what we're terming hire in place. And this new option would provide funding to hire up to 10 custodians, which we know would bring it back to what it was in previous years. This would allow for Mark to work alongside with CUPE and to hire hopefully up to 6 by February 1st, which is pretty ambitious, but and then additional 2 by March 1st and 2 more by April 1st. This is contingent on the availability of the budget as the amended annual budget process concludes. So as that amended annual budget is presented to the board on February 21st, the funds that are available would be used to hire these custodians back. And it would also allow for those levels to be looked at and establish appropriate service and for the 23-24 school year as well. So we're looking at this opportunity for the rest of this year, but also utilizing collaborative conversations to plan for the future years. You'll see in the recommended motion the amount that would be added to the custodial relief account, and that's to a maximum amount. And again, that's subject to the availability of budget after the amended annual budget process. So happy to answer questions. This is has come as a result of conversations with Mark and also with Marnie. Also listening to feedback that we received in previous committee meetings and in conversations with, or as we would move forward with QP 382.
We'll start with Trustee Duncan and Trustee Carmichael after.
Yeah, no, thank you, Superintendent. I really appreciate the memo and also the recommendation. I just wondered if you would mind just clarifying the timeline for folks in terms of sort of when a decision needs to be made, and I know it's around the amended annual budget process. I'm assuming around February, but if we could clarify the timeline, that would be great.
I can. So recommended motion would could go to the board meeting at the end of January. Mark would begin hiring as quickly as possible. The amount would be, though, the maximum amount would be subject to the availability of that in a budget. So that would have to be decided after the amended annual budget is done. So I'll lean into Katrina, she is the budget person, or Julie, but I believe hiring would begin or commence as quickly as possible. The top amount, though, would have to wait until an amended budget, but I'll just look to Katrina to make sure that's accurate.
Yeah, that's exactly what we were thinking, that Mark's going to need that time to get those custodians hired. And I think if that's what the board is supporting, then we would commence that immediately and understand that whatever the costs would be based on our estimation when we do the final budget. We would look to see if there's budget available for that in the final budget process. Obviously, if not, then we would have to talk about what to do at that point. But the maximum, like if he was able to hire 6 people by February 1st to the end of the year, and another 2 by March, another 2 by April would be 209. So any variance from that would obviously be a lower cost.
So just to clarify then, if I may, Chair. So essentially a decision this evening would be appreciated so that it could go to January board. Yeah, okay. No, that's very helpful. Thank you so much. And if there isn't, I don't know if there's anybody else that has their hand up, Chair. I did have one more just point of clarification. Oh, I will wait and cede the floor to my colleague, Trustee Carmichael.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the memo, Superintendent Whitten. I was really happy to see it, and I was really looking forward to maybe hiring some more custodians as soon as possible. February 1st is a lot quicker than I would have assumed, and so that's even better. My question is, would we be rehiring custodians who had, lost their job due to budget cuts previous, and are we sure that they would be willing to come back to the district? Just because, when you lose your job and it really sends your family into kind of a tailspin, people are always a little wary of coming back to an employer if it's not, a stable place to work. So I guess my question basically is, do we have 6 custodians ready, willing, and able to come back by the 1st of February?
Thank you. Trustee Carmichael, that's an excellent question. I'm not sure that we do. I think when I was speaking with Mark, or when we were speaking with Mark, that's his hope, and recognizing that he's tried to find relief custodians, that hasn't always been possible either. So this would be quite ambitious and hopeful, but he is very dedicated and committed to doing that as soon as possible. With regards to people coming back, again, I think that that would be up to them. Having said that, though, this is one of the reasons why we're looking at this not being a 1 year or 1.5 year solution, because that is very impactful to CUPE members themselves, and also to the district facilities and CUPE as a whole. It wasn't an easy process, and it wouldn't be an easy process having them come back and then having them potentially leave again. So we would want this to be something that is possible moving forward, mindful of that.
I agree completely. Thank you for that. I appreciate you.
Trustee Kwan, you go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, it was just kind of a follow-up to that as far as relief goes. Even if we don't have, the full budget, I think Katrina, you had said that, it depends on what that amended budget looks like, and it may reduce the cost a little bit. But would that, in essence, going ahead and starting that hiring process, could that help us with those relief? Would we have enough hours to go around? Would that, what kind of, pros would that create? What kind of cons would that create as far as the hiring process, and how does that tie into relief as well?
I can start by answering, and I also recognize Marnie's on the call, not to put Marnie on the spot, but I believe in speaking with Mark that this would be, well, number one, we'd be addressing the greatest need. So as people would come on, he would place them at the greatest need. And I would assume that would be at a full-time position, as we have custodians coming back on board. And if that is to start with, he has 2, he'd be placing them again where he sees, and where also he is in collaboration with CUPE 382 around that place. Is that correct, Marnie?
Yeah, my understanding too is that we'd go on the spare board, so they'd be needed as is. So if there's an absent that day, that they would fill that shift. So there'd be, when there's someone's out sick, they'd get the replacement there, and as needed. There's some schools that have a principal, no VP. I could see some assistance there. So there's just some more schools in more need than others.
Hey, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify something. As I was reading the memo, I note that it speaks to 10 additional custodial positions that were funded through the COVID specific provincial funding. And then it specifies the reduction of, again, 10 positions in elementary and middle. And I just wanted to clarify rationale behind, removing the 10 positions that we had originally recruited with COVID funding, but specifically from elementary and middle schools, and how that worked sort of in practice, because it started to make me question my understanding of sort of how this reduction was implemented. So I understood it was going to affect elementary schools in particular, but I'm wondering, I guess I'm wondering what the rationale was for sort of focusing mostly on elementary when we were removing those 10 positions that we had funded through COVID funds.
I think I understand your question, but I may ask for clarity, and welcome Marnie to jump in. So when you're asking that, are you speaking about the decision of why elementary, or in general?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, so, I'm noting from the memo that the 10 positions we're talking about were funded with COVID money provided by the province. We then reduced that last financial, resulting in the reduction of 10 positions, but those 10 positions were reduced in elementary and middle in particular. My understanding of when we recruited additional custodial staffing with that COVID funding, it was spread across the district at all school levels. And so I'm wondering why, when we reduced the 10 in the following financial year or last financial year, why we focused the reductions on elementary and middle. And maybe my understanding of how we spread that COVID funding and those 10 positions across the district is just not right. But I thought it was to ensure that schools at every level, whether it be elementary, middle, or high school, got additional cleaning in order to meet COVID cleaning protocols. So just wondering why the reductions were focused only on elementary and middle.
I think during the budget process of last year, we spoke about typically elementary and middle have the smallest or footprint. So the square footage of a building is typically smallest at elementary, although that's not always the case. We also talked about the difference between the needs of a secondary school compared to elementary and middle. And then there was a shift between reducing daytime custodians and increasing evening custodians. So I think it wasn't just a simple reduction of 50%. It was a mix of then adding back some at the evening. But again, I think that would be better for Mark to explain than for me, or Marnie if she has anything to add.
Nothing to add, thanks.
And just for me, Chair, just as a point of follow-up, so I guess just to clarify my confusion, the reason it was confusing to me was I was thinking to myself, well, why didn't we just go back to a pre-COVID staffing levels in all schools, including elementary and middle? And that's where I started to kind of get confused. So yeah, if there could be some clarification around that would be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, next up is Cindy Rolfe.
Hi, I just wanted some clarification as to if they chose like option 1 or option 5. From what I understand from what people have been saying is that you're having difficulty, our district is having difficulty filling positions, particularly getting spare board to come when there are absences. So I'm wondering if, for example, the hiring process for option 1 versus something like option 5, where option 1 is, it says 19 plus day, custodians, is that right? So will those current custodians in their current jobs, what will happen to them? As opposed to like option 5 where it says there's 6 that will be hired for February 1st. So with those 6 people, and you mentioned full-time positions, what will happen to those current jobs in those elementary middle schools? And then will the process be again repeated in March 1st and April 1st?
So I think that's the, thanks Cindy for the question. I think that is the important part of working alongside QP382 is to identify the need and to identify the deployment plan. First and foremost, it's hiring the people, which is what we're kind of looking to try and do as quickly as possible. I think reverting back assumes that is possible first, and the disruption to what is not going to work in the short term, nor does it allow for an opportunity to discuss what was in the past, was it working? And so one of the reasons why we're proposing option 5 is the lag of hiring that will occur. There won't be tomorrow where there are 10, and also placing them or putting them back into something that is not going to be possible without a lot of consultation and collaboration with 382. It was quite a intricate process of laying off, and it isn't as easy as hiring back and placing them back. So I think that's why Mark, Dave Emerson and Paul would be speaking about this and looking at the best way forward.
And Paula.
Thank you, Chair Painter. First of all, I just wanted to say on behalf of VCPAC that we are really thrilled to see these various options coming before the board. And while we're not going to say which one we prefer, because we know that you all know much more about that than we do, this is one of the key things that we hear at our meetings about, especially parents who are at the elementary and middle schools, is what a huge issue this has been to not have these custodial positions. So while we are thrilled to see, hopefully, a return to some of these positions, that we will be able to actually get people for these positions, we hope that this will be ongoing. We do have concerns about some other shortages from last year's budget. And we are very hopeful that the next budget, the 2023-2024 budget, will look very thoughtfully at these areas just to ensure that we continue to fit policy and regulations, and also hold the strategic plan, right at the center, to ensure that we're keeping students at the center of everything we're doing. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to test the appetite of the committee. Is there a wish to move forward with the motion at this point? In theory, it could be introduced at board without passing here, but is there an appetite to move forward with the motion as presented in the presentation? Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the will of the committee, but I would really like some clarification around, why we didn't just simply return to sort of pre-COVID custodial staffing levels, and why the cuts were so heavily focused on elementary and middle, to sort of ground our decision making. I don't know if it's possible to hear from Mark and the team, and if that will help us at board if we do move this forward to board, just so that once we get to board, we've got some of the answers to some of these questions before we ultimately vote and move things forward. So yeah, I guess I want to hear from my colleagues about whether or not we think we're in a position to at least move this forward to the board.
Yeah, I have to accept that, or acknowledge that I had similar questions, and simply wondering whether or not we move it forward at this point, but the final decision would be dependent on that information. Trustee Gagnon.
Thank you, Chair. I echo the sentiments where I feel like there's more questions to be asked but in light that we have 2 weeks, I believe, if my math is correct, until the board meeting, we could refer it and make amendments at that time if that is something that is possible. But I would definitely want a little bit more information from Mark Baggett and his team about options.
Thank you. And Paul Napick from QP382, great to hear you weigh in on this.
Yeah, thanks. I think I can add some clarification maybe with the question about pre-COVID and the COVID funding and whatnot. So before COVID, of course, we had daytime custodians at every single school for 8 hours. And when COVID came around, this district was in a very, very, very good position because he had daytime custodians. Other districts that didn't, they had to hire daytime custodians. So the extra cleaning that we had was it was added on to the daytime custodians. So we had people wiping down all the tables and handrails and whatnot. So that was on top of the daytime custodians. So they were doing all the tabletops and all the hard surfaces and whatnot. And then after COVID, that funding was rescinded. So you didn't have that extra cleaning. And then the cuts came to the custodial department. And of course, they cut half the custodians out of the K-5 and the middle school. So I think that's where some of the misinformation is coming from. I will say this, so that the morale right now of our members is absolutely rock bottom. I've been with the district since 1991. I've never seen it so low. It's like really bad. And the big one is not being able to finish your job. I mean, they're leaving stuff undone, and it's a real sense of frustration. Imagine going to your job and not being enough time to get your job done and leaving stuff. And I mean, your job is cleaning and leaving school dirty. So yeah, morale is in. I'm really happy to see this on the table. And I really think we should reinstate the daytime custodians as they were. Thanks.
Just if I could ask a quick question of clarification. When you say that extra cleaning was added on to the daytime custodians, do you mean that daytime custodians were given additional hours?
Yeah. So there was like Mark can answer that best, and maybe Marnie, but the province knew that we had to get extra cleaning in the schools because of COVID, right? So we had extra. They hired extra people, and that's was their job, is strictly wiping down tabletops, doorknobs, handrails, and doing all the hard surface cleaning and whatnot. So that was the extra cleaning you got, and that was an extra. All the districts had this extra cleaning handed to them. And what I mean by we were at a very, very good position is we had daytime custodians, so there was no scrambling to try to reinstate daytime custodians and whatnot, like other districts I would assume had to. And we already had it in place, so we were really ahead of the game, like leading the charge, right? And then I know there was a big talk amongst the province where it was like we should be leaving daytime custodians, and we were shocked, absolutely shocked, that in the midst of COVID, we're still in COVID, that the cuts would be made to daytime custodians. I mean, the cleanliness of the school and whatnot. It was. We were just flabbergasted. And the workers, we worked all the way through. There was no server or anything. We were working and stuff, and it's that's just another kind of the reward for hard work was we're going to cut half of you. That's why I think the morale is really at an all-time low.
Thank you for that. Trustee Gagnon.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you to Paul, if I may. Just wanted to clarify that. So the custodial staff was at the pre-COVID level, it then went to the COVID level, and then back to the pre-COVID level, and then got cut down to where it is now.
Okay. there's a lot there. Okay, so before COVID, the, District 61 had full-time custodians. So so other districts didn't have daytime custodians, but through the years, there's been major cuts, and I mean major cuts to the custodial departments through the years. But when cuts were being made, they were adding work to the daytime custodians. So back in the day when I first started, a daytime custodian had just about no cleaning run during the day. So they were maintaining the school, but there would be cutbacks. So they started giving the custodians rooms and stuff to clean, an actual designated run. So if you were at Lake Hill, you might have 5 classrooms, a washroom, the hallway, and the gymnasium. So you had cleaning. So when you cut daytime custodians now, that cleaning has to be put on to the evening custodians. So you're not getting a full, when you cut custodians, you have to add stuff to the night. So you're not getting a whole big savings when you cut custodians. But having said that, so we did have full-time custodians, but then COVID came. And the province said, we need more cleaning in the schools. We have to wipe down. I mean, you know, let's think about this. There was no vaccines or anything. I mean, it was panic stations, right? So we had extra cleaning coming in, and that's what they were doing. They were assisting the daytime custodians. And then that funding went away. So that extra help was no longer there. And then on top of that, the daytime custodians were also cut in half from K-5 and for middle school. So it was a double whammy that's actually happened to the cleaning of the school system, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So it was kind of like simultaneous.
Very close to, it might be a year's different. I think it was a year in lapse, but yeah, it was very, I mean, COVID's been around for 3 years, and I think that was, I'm not 100%, Mark Baggett would know better, or Marnie might know the actual dates. I don't know the actual dates, but yeah, it came as a complete shock that there was another cut to custodial.
Thanks, Paul.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So it sounds to me like that there was an additional cut. It's more than 10 FTE, more than just the COVID related funding that was cut. But I think we need to get that clarification from Mark and the team. I'm perfectly happy to refer this to the board. I'm mindful of the fact that there is a timing issue here, and that if we don't refer to the board for a decision, assuming we can get the answers we need by board time, that'll impact on Mark and HR and some of the consultation that needs to start right away. So I don't know if we can, Chair, through you, refer just a motion to refer this to board. And that'll give us some flexibility about what we do at board. Maybe we accept recommendation 5, maybe we don't. But if we refer to board, then at least it's on the agenda for the end of the month.
Just a procedural question. Our normal way of referring to the board would be to pass the motion at committee. Are we suggesting, rather than taking a vote at all right now, we simply refer?
Yeah, so I'm suggesting that what we need to do, and again, I'm at the committee's disposal, of course, but I'm suggesting that what we really need to do is refer the matter, because we can't come to a determination. We normally would recommend through voting in favor of a particular option. At this point, we're really not in a position to vote in favor of a particular option, but we do know that we do need to consider it and possibly come to a determination at board. So by referring the item, we allow the whole thing to move without predetermining the outcome until we have the answers we need at board time.
Thanks for your clarification. Trustee Kwan.
Sorry, I actually saw Marnie's hand up. I just wanted to point out, I think she has something to say.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm just texting with Mark Baggett, and he can log in right now and answer some of these questions if that helps, if we can give him about a minute. I just sent him a meeting invite.
Thanks. And thanks, Karen. Marnie was hiding behind another one of my pop-up windows, so it's challenging some days.
To save time, do you want me to present the ops report and then go back to this once Mark is
Yes, that's an excellent idea.
sorry, just now everybody wants to get home. So okay, Mark's logging in now, and I'll just do a quick ops report if that helps. If that's fine, if I may, please.
Please.
Okay, so a quick one. Snow, as we all knew, happened over Christmas holidays. So we had a few issues for facilities. The most significant was a flood at Colquitt's when a pipe burst caused some water damage in some classrooms and an office. But it was dried out, ceiling tiles were replaced. So we're still working on the remediation, but there's a little bit of damage. The metal shop, the work in the metal shop is proceeding well with safety lines painting in the summer months. So right now what they're doing is they're kind of moving from school to school to school as classes are not in session. So they plan to have everything wrapped up in June with the line painting in the summer months. Lots of projects in minor capital. So the DDC upgrades are progressing. They're almost near completion, and that will save some energy in the future for our schools. The contractor is now in place to install the 8 new unit ventilation units at Mackenzie. The childcare sites are all progressing well, as is the shoreline classroom. We're just doing the submittals to the municipality right now, and Vic West portable classroom is going well. We're hoping to have that open for after March break. Operations, snow did not assist with the winter cleanup plans, and nor does the flu season. So Mark and crew are still working really hard and actually getting some more custodians hired. The transportation department purchased the first electric fleet vehicles that should arrive in early spring, which is exciting. They're also preparing the busing portal for the bus registration for the next school year. So the 2023-24 school year, it will open in February. The grounds department is also completing a massive preventative tree maintenance planning program. And what they're doing is they're putting split rail around all the trees that are getting compacted by little feet right now. And then they'll go back and aerate. So that's happening at a number of our schools. The network department, NCIS, is finally received their back order of tech packages. So they're starting to install. They're also still continuing to do the maintenance program. And just to give you an idea, their maintenance program is so successful, we're able to get an extra 2 to 3 years per tech package. So that's pretty incredible. And also, even despite the snow, they were actually during Christmas, they're able to convert Eagleview to a fully fob accessible school. And the energy manager is still working on lighting upgrades at View Royal and Cloverdale, and he's submitted the next lighting upgrades for the next school year to BC Hydro. He's working on the climate action plan, and he's also working on the continuous optimization for a few schools. And he's still working away on the lights out sticker campaign through all the elementary schools. So he's still going school by school. It's a really successful campaign. So that sums it all up. If there's questions.
Karen, Trustee Kwan, sorry.
Is it all right if we ask questions about facilities or direct to facilities before we go back to Mark? Or
yeah, let's do this one item and then we'll do this completely and then we'll move on to Mark.
Okay, so through your chair, either to Marnie or Superintendent Whitten, I had heard that some talk about from parents and such about Tillicum actually having some space issues and what to do with extra classes that might have to go there. And I just wondered if there was an update, that we might be able to get regarding Tillicum and space.
So I can answer that. That we are in discussions. If the capacity does become that we need a new classroom, we're looking at different options. So once the different options are determined, that we will go back to the principal and present all that information. And so that's where it's sitting. Nothing has been finalized yet. Welcome.
I had one question, Marnie. The strategic energy management plan that was ready for approval, approval internally or coming to the board someday soon, or?
Sorry, that might be a best question for Deb. It is definitely done. Approval, it's gone to BC Hydro already. It's what the plan that he does. We have to do quarterly reports to BC Hydro, so that's what he works off of. I've never heard. I'm not 100% if it goes to the board. But that'd be.
Yep. Just interested in the title. And Mark Baggett, thank you for making yourself available at this time of the evening. We are very appreciative. Trustees with questions for Mr. Baggett, please raise your hands and we'll carry on. Okay, I'm not, oh, there, no. Yes, Trustee Duncan, you win the
Hi,
prize.
sorry, it took me a little while to get to my little reaction symbol and get my hand up, my virtual hand up, so sorry. Yeah, thanks Mark for joining us at this late hour. I just had some questions around custodial cuts, and really my question was just, we've read in a memo this evening that the 10 FT custodial positions that were cut, that those positions originally were funded with provincial COVID funding, and then during the last budget cycle, the board voted to cut 10 positions. Those positions came, out of elementary and middle schools, as we know. My question was just, I was confused as to why, if we were simply cutting 10 positions that we had funded with COVID funds, why we didn't just revert back to the original allocation of custodial staff at elementary, middle, and high school. So like the pre-COVID staffing complement, why we didn't just revert back to that, and why the cuts were focused on elementary and middle.
So the during the last school year, the one that ended in June of 2022, we had 10 additional positions funded by provincial COVID funding. Those positions ended on June 30th, 2022. And the budget that was ratified earlier in 2022 for the July 1st, 2023 school year start was for 10 positions less. And the motion from the board, the budget that came through, was for a 50% reduction in day custodians for middle and elementary. At no point did we know that if the provincial government was going to fund any more COVID positions, those essentially didn't come through in August before school startup. So I would say there may be some confusion because it's 10 positions on both those numbers, but they are two distinct groups. There's a COVID funding that we had in an excess of 10 positions, and we also had a 10 reduction. So it's essentially a 20 employee reduction from the end of last school year to the beginning of this school year.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. That makes a lot more sense. Yeah, that it's actually, we're talking about an additional cut essentially for the 2020, well, for September, for the new school year, the one we're in now. Yeah. No, that makes a lot more sense. And I wonder if you could provide us some context as to, what the rush or the thinking was behind taking that additional cut from elementary and middle, as opposed to sort of spreading it more evenly across all of the different school levels.
So from when the budget committee made the decision and it was passed the board, it was dictated as a 50% cut in middle and elementary day custodians. So there wasn't a lot of flexibility from an operations standpoint on where to pull those members from.
I see. So if I'm understanding correctly, the decision was made at a higher level, let's just say, for lack of a better way to put it, and there was no request to kind of for your input or the team's input.
Essentially, that's true. I was involved in providing options ahead of the budget committee's decisions. So I was providing information beforehand.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it. And thanks again for joining so late.
No problem. I'll stick around in case there's other questions.
Trustee Kwan, that might be you.
Just a quick point of clarification. So technically with the addition of let's say if we're able to do it, 10 more positions, that basically makes us at pre-COVID levels again?
Yes, 10 positions is this. If we gain 10 positions, we are at pre-COVID levels, correct?
Perfect, thank you.
And I'll just ask my question of clarification. The 209,000 roughly of hiring between now and end of the school year. That's just to get us to the end of the school year, if I understand correctly. And that if we were going to hire 10 positions full-time year-round on an ongoing basis, then we'd be looking at numbers akin to your previous options that had been proposed of around $600,000 for all 10 positions. Okay,
that's correct. So the 209 is to get us through this school year, and the reason it's a low number is because there's a hiring runway that we would need to get through, and we've already through half the year, so it's less than half of what the amount requested is. And if there's no additional funding in future budget years, I'm essentially going to be hiring those people to then lay them off in July. So that's what the outlook is for that 209.
Understood. Thank you. Trustee Gagnon, followed by Trustee Duncan.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Mark. Oh man, my train of thought just went for a derailment there. Never mind. I'll kick it over to somebody else because my train of thought just left the station. My apologies.
Hey, Trustee Duncan, and then Cindy Rumpf is next up after that.
Yeah, no, this is what happens at 10 to 10 at night. So yeah, just wanted to clarify then that in terms of the recommended motion, that there would be flexibility. So I guess what I'm hoping is that whatever the outcome is around budget, some of it is out of our hands, but that from an operational perspective, the team has an opportunity to make recommendations about how to allocate that funding and how to best serve the school community. So I'm assuming that the way that the motion is drafted now, it is intended that there'll be an opportunity for Mark and the team and the union to be able to collaborate together to make a recommendation about how best to allocate those additional resources. I just wanted to clarify that. Is that right? Is that correct?
It's the intent. Yep.
Okay. No, that's great.
Okay, Cindy.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that morale just generally across education, I think, is been pretty low coming out of COVID with the lifting of COVID restrictions. But in particular in our district, our custodians have been hit really hard. So I'm wondering what we can do to support them through this process, just to have them gain more trust and, jobs for them to be happier in their work environment through this process.
Cindy, are you? Yeah, I'm not sure who you're directing it to.
I don't know. I don't know. I just want to make sure that they're being consulted and they're being heard through this process. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So that, yeah.
I think that's definitely an issue that needs some additional consideration. I don't know that we're going to address it tonight, though. Trustee Gagnon.
Thank you, Chair. The train came back. So we're looking at I'm looking at the table with the list of the 6 options for funding. So if we did the hire in place, that's an additional $209,000 towards this year's budget. And then if we were to carry that over, which would be the nice thing to do if we want to treat staff in a respectful way, would be the column 1, which is revert. And that would have us adding 19 day custodians and dropping 10 evening. And it kind of ties into something that we talked about a little bit earlier before I believe you came online. But that dropping of the 10 evening custodians, is that something that is according to you, Mark, a risk of, like, what are the chances that those evening custodians become daytime custodians? It's really the crux of what I'm trying to ask.
Good question. So yes, essentially on the revert, we would be putting day custodians back into like full-time 8-hour shifts into all middle and elementary. As a result of that, we will be reducing the evening runs in those schools because we're picking up that cleaning in the daytime. So like that's where the math comes out. But your question is right, as how many evening staff are looking for a day job. And on a recent posting for a day position, there were, close to 10 people that were looking for that. So is it a desirable shift? Yes. Desirable enough to fill with our current staff? I think so. Yes. I guess that's a quick, dirty answer. It's, again, it's a guess based on how I feel people want things. But yeah.
Yep, that's all I was looking for, is best guess. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, based on this additional information, just want to get a sense of the committee's perspective on moving forward. Are we still interested in referring, or do we now feel like we have enough direction or information to actually vote on the motion? Refer? Just asking for a show of hands, not voting myself. Okay, vote. So we have 1 for vote, and I'm sorry, at least 2 for 3 for refer. So with that in mind, I think we will go the refer route. Would someone like to propose to refer? Trustee Duncan. So move to refer the recommended motion to board January board meeting.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think I really just, appreciate Mark being here, and I think it'll give us a little time too, just as a budget advisory committee to, we're going to be meeting before board, I believe, if I'm correct. I think it's on the 19th. I know we're not discussing, because this particular topic I don't think is going to be on the agenda, but again, maybe staff can correct me if I'm wrong. But it'll give us a little bit more breathing space to consider some of the options, rather than making any kind of snap decision tonight, and it won't affect Mark and the team's ability to, get to recruitment. So yeah, I think it's the more prudent approach.
Okay, so moved by Trustee Duncan. All those in favor of referring to January board? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much, Mark. We really appreciate you taking the time to connect in with us.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks to every other staff person here tonight at almost 10 o'clock. Your contributions to this effort do not go unnoticed. Let's move on to F3, Victoria High School Seismic Project update.
Yeah, short update. So we're still working on awarding all our portions of the finishing carpenter tender. The final tender package came in, and the one bidder was higher than the budget, so we're still working on that. The interior drywall is progressing well. The flooring installation, the millwork is going to start this week finally, which is great. Crews are still working hard to finish the electrical and mechanical roughing that's nearing completion. The window replacement and the brick and terracotta upgrades are progressing well and will be progressing well for a number of more months. The contractor is currently installing the parking lot and sports field curbing and is now completing the site prep for the volleyball area. And the first monthly report will be provided shortly to the Central and Vic High communities that was discussed in one of last month's meeting. I just honestly don't know which meeting it was in, but that report's done to be sent out to the schools. And that's it. Any questions?
Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, quickly, with regards to next school year, I know we're not now planning to move in until January 2024, and I just wondered if we still have enough space, what the capacity will be or expected enrollment will be for September of 2023, and with the temporary school, whether there'll be enough, and if not, what the contingency might be.
I'm actually going to ask either Tom or Harold to answer that, since that's a capacity question, if that's possible, or Deb.
Yep, happy to answer that. Thanks. We don't anticipate there being a capacity issue at Vic High at this time. Identified Tilcom earlier. We'll have registration and cross boundary that'll happen in February, and we'll be able to at that time. But at this time, that's not something we're foreseeing.
And Marnie, I just wanted to confirm that the dates that are on the update, those are the ones that were recently discussed. Like, are we pre-winter break?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a quick question just around the budget through the chair to Marnie. I just wondered where we're at. I know we've allocated all of the risk reserve, and I'm wondering where we are in terms of asking for additional risk-related funding approval from the ministry.
Yeah, so we submitted our risk reserve request into the ministry prior to Christmas. They've come back with a number of questions, and we're just waiting for their final approval. So we're expecting their final approval any day now.
Great, that's good news. Thanks so much.
Welcome.
Anything further? Seeing none, thank you very much, Marnie.
You're welcome.
No disclosure of in-camera items and new business. Trustee Kwan, did you want to just provide us with an update on this one?
Yeah, actually, I think Marnie has probably alluded to what I'm going to say right now, but I think actually operationally between facilities and the superintendent, there has been something put in place already to make sure that all of the packs for both Central and Vic High are getting updates with regards to the Vic High building. So I would withdraw that motion.
Okay, that makes that much easier. I see no notice of motion. Anyone? No one's slipping one in. No general announcements. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Trustee Gagnon. Quickest off the mark. All those in favor? And that vote is unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. It was a longer meeting, but I think a very worthwhile one. A lot of good discussion. So thank you. Have a wonderful night. Bye all.
Thanks, everyone.